It started the night my sister moved back in with me, freshly divorced and trying to pull herself together. She'd been living in the guest room of my narrow two-story house on the edge of a quiet, dimly lit street, the kind where the neighbors don't say much and the streetlights buzz just a bit too loud after dark. And at first everything felt normal, until the third night, when I woke to the sound of her voice calling my name in the middle of the night, only to find her standing, frozen at the top of the stairs, pale as chalk, whispering, "He's down there." I followed her gaze down the steps, expecting to see maybe a raccoon or even a burglar, but the darkness at the foot of the stairs was so thick it looked like it was swallowing the last few steps whole, and though I saw nothing, I felt it, an overwhelming dread, like being watched through a keyhole, that primal cold rush that told me we weren't alone. And when I flicked on the light, of course, there was nothing there. My sister swore she'd seen a man just standing there looking up at her, tall and impossibly thin, wearing a long black coat that looked soaked, his face obscured except for a grin that stretched too far, too wide. I laughed it off at first, chalking it up to stress or maybe even sleep paralysis, but each night after, something happened. Once it was the sound of heavy boots pacing slowly at the bottom of the stairs, back and forth like he was waiting. Another time we found muddy footprints on the floor leading up 3 steps and stopping abruptly. And worst of all was the time we both awoke to the same dream of being dragged down the stairs by long, clawed hands, unable to scream. Eventually we stopped using the stairwell at night altogether, opting to stay upstairs with the doors locked until the night I found her room empty, bed cold, her window wide open even though it was raining. And when I went downstairs, I found her standing again at the bottom of the stairs, barefoot and soaking wet, just staring at the wall, unmoving, her eyes wide and blank. I rushed to her, shaking her, calling her name, but she just whispered. He finally smiled for real this time, and when I looked toward the wall she'd been staring at, there was a smeared handprint, a long, distorted palm dragging down, the wallpaper as if someone had clawed their way out of it. I took her to the hospital the next morning. They diagnosed her with a stress-induced fugue state and kept her for observation, but when I returned home alone that night, I made the mistake of checking the stairs one last time, just to prove to myself it was over. And at the very bottom, in the dark, he was there, just barely visible, standing with his head tilted and his arms outstretched like he was ready to catch me. When I first bought the Victorian house on Elm Street, a creaky, peeling relic nestled at the end of a quiet lane, I was enchanted by its faded grandeur and the way the evening sun filtered through stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the dusty floors. But it wasn't long before the charm curdled into something sinister. At first, it was the usual sounds of an old house settling, soft groans, the shifting of timber, faint pops echoing through the walls, but as days passed, these noises grew more deliberate, almost like murmurs, whispers that slithered through the plaster, thin and cold as breath against skin, too low to catch clearly, yet persistent enough to drag my eyes open at 3 a.m. one night. Lying awake, I pressed my ear to the wall of the bedroom I'd chosen, hoping to rationalize the sound, but instead, I was met with an unmistakable voice, soft, cracked and urgent, whispering a single word: help. A chill ran down my spine. I pulled back, heart hammering, but the whispering didn't stop. It shifted, becoming a staccato of frantic pleas, names that no one living would recognize, stories told in fragmented sentences about sorrow, pain, and betrayal, voices from beyond the veil woven into the house's very structure. I started to notice subtle changes, faint faces etched beneath peeling wallpaper, eyes hollow and pleading, mouths open in silent screams, as if the house itself was a tomb, a cage for trapped souls desperate for escape. At times the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs, a slow pulse beneath my fingertips when I touched the cracked plaster, and the shadows within the patterns on the walls appeared to move on their own accord, stretching, hand writhing like living things desperate to break free. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was stress or the imagination playing tricks on a man who had lived alone for too long. But the house wouldn't relent. Instead, The nightly whispers grew louder, more insistent, swirling into disturbing lullabies sung in voices both male and female, young and old, each telling a piece of a long-buried tragedy. On a sleepless night, compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, I began to speak back, asking what they wanted, who they were. And the walls seemed to respond, the voices layering into a chorus of agony, recounting a forgotten fire that had sealed the fate of a family, the loss of a child swallowed by the earth beneath the foundation, and betrayals so cruel they had stained the house's soul forever. Then the scratching began, sharp, frantic claw marks dragging just beneath the surface, like fingers desperate to claw their way out of a coffin. One evening, as I sat alone in the dim light, the plaster cracked with a sudden snap, and a thin, cold tendril of something intangible but horrifying slid through the fracture, brushing against my arm like a breath from the grave, freezing me to the core. From that moment on, the house owned me. I could no longer sleep, for the whispers never ceased. The walls sang songs of torment that gnawed at my sanity, their voices a haunting lullaby promising release if only I would join them. And sometimes when the house was silent, I swear I hear the faintest footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, moving just beyond the edge of the light, and sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, the walls press close like cold hands, squeezing me with an unbearable weight of centuries of sorrow, reminding me that some homes are more than walls and wood. They are prisons, and I had become the newest inmate, trapped forever by the whispering walls. I had always been drawn to old houses, the creaks and whispers that spoke of lives long past. So when I inherited my grandmother's ramshackle house at the edge of town, I thought it was a gift, a place full of history and secrets waiting to be uncovered. But nothing prepared me for the attic, a cramped, dust-choked space that no one had entered in decades, rumored among family members to be off-limits and cursed, and I was foolish enough to ignore the warnings. On the first night I spent there, I awoke to the sound of soft footsteps above me, a slow, deliberate shuffle that moved back and forth like someone pacing. But when I went upstairs, the attic was empty. Only cobwebs and broken furniture greeted me. Yet I felt the undeniable weight of a presence, cold and watchful, lurking just beyond the fragile glow of my flashlight. Nights grew worse, with whispers seeping from the cracked floorboards, calling my name in a voice that was almost familiar, but twisted with something unnatural, and shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, darting and retreating before I could focus on them, like the house itself was breathing secrets I wasn't meant to hear. One night, I found an old faded journal hidden beneath the floorboards, pages yellowed and brittle detailing my grandmother's obsession with contacting spirits trapped in the house, describing rituals and warnings about a dark entity she called the Shadow, a malevolent force that could manipulate reality itself, feeding on fear and sorrow, trapped in the attic but yearning to escape. The entries grew frantic, ending abruptly with a scrawled note, "Do not look into the Shadow's eyes or it will pull you in forever." From that night forward, the atmosphere turned oppressive. Cold spots appeared suddenly. The lights flickered without cause, and the footsteps in the attic became a sinister rhythm that matched the pounding of my own heart, until one evening I heard a slow, chilling whisper right behind me saying, "You shouldn't have come here." And when I turned, the attic door slammed shut on its own, trapping me in darkness so complete it felt like drowning. Panic set in as the shadows in the corner twisted into a humanoid shape, taller than any person, with eyes like black voids that seemed to suck in every speck of light, and I realized too late that the Shadow was no ghost, but a presence, hungry for a new host, whispering promises of power and eternal night, pulling me toward the darkness with cold fingers that felt like they were made of smoke. I fought to escape, scrambling down the stairs, but the house fought back. The walls seemed to close in, the floorboards groaning like a beast awakening, and when I finally burst into the street, gasping for breath under the cold moonlight, I looked back and saw the attic window flicker with a dark silhouette watching me, waiting, patient and eternal, reminding me that some houses don't just hold ghosts, they trap souls, and I was lucky to have escaped with mine, but forever, haunted by the shadow in the attic that still calls my name in the darkest hours of the night.